All right, guys. Well, let's jump in. Happy Monday. Appreciate you guys jumping on today. Um, I wish I could sit here and tell you that things are great and rates are coming down and inflation's cooling and all kinds of good news, but we've got some bumpiness in the markets this week. So I want to kind of dive into some cause and effect of what's happening in the markets right now, what we're seeing. We have a new Fed chair that has some potentials to move the markets. And then, what we think will happen over the next few months. I posted three article links in the chat. And if you guys are near a computer, I'd encourage you to grab those. They're great reads. I'm going to talk about them a little bit here on the call. Um, but some good information, good market intelligence, if you guys want to grab those, and really some good talking points to share, both like on social media, posting videos, and also just in direct conversations with clients. Um, all right. So the big news of the last week is we got the April consumer price index and producer price index. So the CPI and PPI measures of inflation. And as expected, inflation is ticking up, directly related to rising oil prices. And we've talked a lot for the past 2 or 3 months now that oil prices are a lagging indicator when it comes to inflation. So um, Iran war breaks out into February, beginning of March. Oil prices immediately increase, but ships are already at sea, shipping oil around the world at prices that have already been agreed to. Um, and goods and services are moving. And so it takes 60 or 90 days from an increase in oil prices to really kind of make its way down the supply chain. Um, and then a lack of oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz, which we've talked about a lot, um, puts pressure on supply and demand as well. And so you're having some supply chain, issues, not really in the States, but overseas. If you think about like during COVID, like it was a rush to the grocery store to buy toilet paper. Um, because we're self-reliant on oil in the States, we're not seeing any of those challenges, but you're starting to see some supply chain issues, cropping up around the world. Like there's jet fuel shortages in Europe, for example. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to walk you through some of the charts and graphs, and then we're going to talk a lot about, I think, what the next few months could look like and what the new Fed chair might do. So, all right. Hey, Ryan, can you see the MBS Highway site? Good. Okay, cool. All right, so this is last Tuesday. So last Tuesday, um, CPI inflation increased from 3.3 to 3.8, which was a little bit hotter than expectations. It was also a big increase. The Fed wants inflation really under 2%. Um, Anything over 3 is kind of viewed as elevated. And inflation was in the 2.6 to 2.9 range for most of this year until a few months ago. So um, concerning but expected with that inflation increase. Most people look at what they call core inflation. So core inflation um, takes away food and energy. And the Federal Reserve looks at core inflation when they're determining monetary policy because the Fed can't impact food prices and fuel prices, energy prices. And so if the Fed watches core inflation, even core is up 2.6 to 2.8. It has not increased to the degree that the headline inflation has, which is up to 3.8%. And again, the difference between the two of these is 1%. That's very large historically. That's all energy related. Um, there's another inflation measure called the producer price index or the PPI, and that's inflation measured at the producer level. So think producer level is what Walmart pays to buy goods, goods that they're going to manufacture and sell. Consumer is what we pay when we go to Walmart, if you guys want to use that analogy. And the PPI, the producer price index inflation, went up 1.4% in the month. Typically, monthly PPI changes are like zero point 0.2 or zero point 0.3. So that was a super hot reading. much hotter than expectations. So PPI went from 4.3 to 6% when it was expected it was going to go from 4.3 to 4.9. So that's a big increase. Even when you take out food and energy, which is a little more volatile, it still rose 1% from 4 to 5.2, way hotter than expectations. And so as a result of not just hotter inflation, but really hotter than expected, the bond market had a rough week. So I'm going to pull up the chart here and show you what kind of Fannie Mae mortgage-backed securities did. But um, the market certainly sold off towards the end of last week, in particular on Friday. Friday was not a great day in the markets. Um, I posted this link here. This is the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage. If you guys go anywhere online to try to figure out what rates are, Mortgage News Daily, in my opinion, is the only reliable source. And I posted a link to this in the chat, but everywhere you go, like if you Google mortgage rates, you're going to find articles that are 5 days old. You're going to find advertising sites that are bait and switch. Mortgage News Daily is a legit daily poll, and it's not an advertising site. Like if you scroll down, you get some ads down here at the bottom of the page, but at the top of the page, just in their chart, it's not an advertisement, it's real, and it changes in real time. So interest rates move daily. They move throughout the day, just like the stock market. And so anything that you get that tells you what rates were last Thursday is dated information. So Mortgage News Daily, I think, is very accurate. The national average is up to 6.6%. So we've kind of gone above 6.5%. And you can see kind of beginning of the Iran war, we got down, 5.99 for just a minute, like last day of February, and then we shot up. We got up to 6.6 at the end of March, early April. And then when the kind of ceasefire talk started, things settled down a little bit, but we've bounced higher, since then. Um, what's troubling about this kind of view of the chart here is the market sold off as expected when oil prices surged at the beginning of the war. Initial kind of talk of a ceasefire, oil prices came down, things improved. And then, since like the middle of April, last 30 days, it's kind of been, one day we have a ceasefire, one day we don't. One day oil's coming down, one day it spikes again. And so we really need to see this trend ending. Like we need to squash this and get back on a downward trend and stay there. But it's concerning that, we've seen rates moving higher now for 30 days, but not just that it's been moving higher for 30 days, but it's moving higher from day 45 through 75 of the conflict. And we're not going to see things move lower really until there's some resolution. So here's the bond market chart. Let me just refresh this page. But the bond market looks very similar to what mortgage rates are doing, which is we've had a sell-off, and then we have talk of a ceasefire, and then things improve. We have to go back almost a full year to see a time when bond prices were at the level they are today. In the invite that we posted, we kind of said rates are about their highest point since last August, and that's pretty much where they are. So then the question becomes like, so how do we improve off of this? Are rates going to get worse before they get better, or what's going to get them to go kind of back on a downward, path to get back sub 6.5? The fives is kind of like out of the question right now, unless you're doing like a 15-year or an adjustable or something. So I'll give you kind of a couple opinions. And so my opinion is that it may get worse before it gets better. It would not surprise me at all to see rates get to 7% in the next 30 days. So
Oof.
when we started today, I said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think it's important to, kind of deal in facts, not in hope. But I would not be surprised in the least if rates went a little bit higher from here. Even if there's a ceasefire, and we've talked about this for a while, and oil comes down, like how quickly will production ramp up? How quickly will the Strait of Hormuz fully open? How quickly will rates come back down? I was watching CNBC this morning, and they had an analyst on that was very good. And he said if there was a ceasefire like today, like and actually, holds, that it could take 2 or 3 months for oil to come down meaningfully. And meaningfully, like 60 to $80 a barrel, like where we were kind of back in February. Um, if it takes 2 or 3 months for that to happen, it might be another month or two beyond that before you start to see inflation numbers coming down. So I think we're in this range for a little while. I don't think we're going straight to 7%. It could be a lot of up and downs, ebbs and flows like we've seen. But it wouldn't surprise me for things to get worse before they get better. Now, for us, so what is the difference for a buyer between a 6.5% and a 7% mortgage? A $300,000 mortgage at 6%, I'm sorry, 6.5, compared to a $300,000 mortgage at 7 is about $100 a month. Um, for many of our buyers, that payment differential is inconsequential, but for some, it's a big deal. And we've talked a lot about the past few months that a trend that we're seeing is there's a big difference between serious buyers who understand there's good opportunities in today's market when there's a lack of competition and like fence sitters. Um, and we've talked a lot about when we look at our pipeline, the people that we have under contract closing in the next 30, 45 days tend to be people that we first contacted in the last couple of weeks. Like we pre-approved them, they got in the car, they started looking, they made an offer, and they closed within a 30, 60-day time frame. And it feels like most of the people that we pre-approved 6 months, 12 months or longer ago that have kind of been casually looking are still kind of sitting on the fence in that casually looking phase. So the person that came to your open house yesterday that someone on our team pre-approved that like is going to make an offer sometime soon, probably less impacted by a 1/4% or 0.5% uptick in rates. The person that you talked to last December and someone on our team pre-approved like 6 months ago, 5 months ago, that's been sitting on the fence waiting for something, maybe waiting for rates to get in the fives. I think this just pushes them farther out. But I'm not sure if that person was going to buy a house anytime soon anyway. So I don't know if you're going to have a big disruption in the market with rates moving higher. I think that you'll probably hear some pessimism and maybe a little bit of negativity from certain buyers. But again, I think we have to analyze the pessimism or negativity or moving off, onto the sidelines. Are those people that really would have been in the market actively looking and engaging and making an offer anyway? I think in most cases, probably not. But I do think it could get a little bit worse before it gets a little bit better. I do think that that brings some opportunities to the table for buyers, because if there is a little bit of a lack of competition, that there's some opportunities. I think for sellers, they've got to get pretty serious because maybe they have a little bit less traffic, fewer buyers looking at their houses if the market, you know, trends to be a little bit slower than maybe it should be this time of the year. Um, there's a lot of talk about Fed Chair Warsh, and this is where things kind of get political. So he was confirmed with 100% votes from the Republican Party. The only Democrat who voted for him was John Fetterman, who's really kind of the only person that's really crossing party lines, right now. So I think he deserves kudos really from most people for on either party. Like very few people are kind of crossing party lines, but it was a very down the line party vote. A lot of people are concerned or have been concerned that Fed Chair Warsh will basically be Donald Trump's puppet, and he'll do whatever Trump wants. And if Trump says cut rates, he'll cut rates. And I think people that have thought that um, haven't analyzed Kevin Warsh's background. And I actually think that now he was a good choice because he's got a very good, strong track record. He's actually a great choice for the time that we're in today. Um, Many of you were around during the financial crisis, whether you in real estate or not. But if you remember, the Fed chair back then was Ben Bernanke, and Ben Bernanke was what would be considered dovish on inflation, meaning that he was more concerned with low unemployment, economic growth, and economic stability than he was with inflation. And Bernanke was probably the right Fed chair in 2006, 7, and 8. he wheeled and dealed and used every tool available that he had to kind of keep us from, a depression. Um, that involved massive Federal Reserve intervention to the tune of trillions of dollars of programs to basically artificially lower interest rates. And Bernanke did a very good job of maneuvering the financial crisis and keeping us from going into a deeper recession or depression. Um, on the other side of that, when the Fed is very involved and kind of printing money, if you will, that leads to the potential for inflation beyond that. The Bernanke Fed in 2006, 7, 8, and beyond did a nice job of government stimulus and intervention, kind of artificially lowering rates without inflation getting out of control, really for the next 10 or 12 years. Um, the difference between Bernanke and Fed Chair Powell, who recently, left office during COVID, is Fed Chair Powell used some of the same tools Ben Bernanke did in 2008 during COVID, artificially stimulated the market. He brought rates down. You can always look back at history and decide years later, was that the right call or not? And, clearly it was not the right call to the degree that they did. And so we overstimulated, brought rates to zero, and that led to a lot of inflation beyond that. And I think he did that because what the Fed did in 2008 didn't lead to inflation. They thought they could do it again, and they were wrong, right? And so Fed Chair Warsh is not considered an inflation dove. He's considered an inflation hawk. And this article that I'm showing you guys here is in the chat. Um, the market initially did not like an interview he did last week. And the interview he did last week confirmed that his opinion is the free market has to work like the free market. And the Fed should not be as involved in some artificial tools and measures to bring rates down. Now, I think Chair Warsh, if he continues down that path, may get a little bit sideways with the president who wants lower interest rates. But I actually think, and I want to make sure you guys understand this, the Fed doing nothing right now and not cutting rates is actually going to bring rates down more long term. So, in I posted this Fed CME chart. I used to show you guys this every week because it was projecting if the Fed's going to cut or hike. And right now, there's actually a greater chance that the Fed hikes the Fed funds rate than the Fed cuts the Fed funds rate. And that's actually a good thing. And that actually will bring mortgage rates down. And I want to walk you through that because that's a little bit counterintuitive. So most people think that if the Fed's cutting, interest rates come down. And generally speaking, that's true. But generally speaking, the reason why the Fed would cut is because inflation's cooling, the economy's slowing, the Fed's trying to get out from underneath it so the economy doesn't fall into a recession. And so a slowing, cooling, low inflation economy, you'll see the Fed cut the Fed funds rate. And because inflation's low, mortgage rates will come down and interest rates and everything will come down. The reason why I think it's actually a good thing if the Fed hikes sooner than later is we have an inflation problem right now. If you remember post-COVID, Chair Powell did not hike the Fed funds rate fast enough. That's why, he was given Jerome Too Late Powell by the president because he hiked rates too late. Inflation was already starting to spike. He didn't hike rates. In fact, he cut a couple times in the fall of 2024, and not hiking or cutting while inflation's rising caused mortgage rates to go up even further and inflation to get out of control. And so, kind of revisionist history, the Fed cut pre-COVID, but post-COVID, they should have hiked a lot faster than they did. Inflation wouldn't have got as high as it did in 2022 and 2023 if the Fed started hiking sooner. So there's a lot of predictions. We haven't looked at this chart much in the past few months because rate cuts or hikes has kind of been off the table. But if we look here, June 17th is Chair Warsh's first meeting as Fed chair. there's a 99% of those polled expect rates to be unchanged. If you go to July, you've got 97% think there's no changes. But by September, and this is kind of projecting that inflation will continue to be elevated, you're starting to see 14, 15% of people think they're going to have a Fed rate hike. By October, that number is 22. And then by December, the last meeting of the year, it's close to 50%. Only 55 think that rates will remain unchanged. I expect these numbers to continue shifting, and I think you're going to see a higher and higher likelihood that the Fed is going to hike at some point this fall, because I don't think inflation is going to come down quickly, and the Fed will probably be forced to act. Most people not on this call are going to hear that, and they're going to think that means mortgage rates are going up. And my opinion, and those that are way smarter than us, would disagree. Most people that really follow the markets will probably start rooting for a Fed rate hike in the fall, because a Fed rate hike will signal to the markets, and it'll signal this new Fed chair is not messing around when it comes to inflation, that they're going to hike because they need to slow the economy down. They need to slow down inflation. So I think that's what's going to come, is maybe a little bit worse before it gets better over the next month or two. Then we might start to see the Fed start hiking a little bit. Hopefully, as they're doing that, that's around the same time that oil prices are coming down, inflation's cooling, and that might be when we see a meaningful move where rates, start moving lower, sub 6.5%. Maybe we get back in that low sixes where we were, here back in February. But I would encourage all of you to read this article from the New York Post. Really good article about the Fed chair, so you get an idea of who and what he is. He is very against QE, or quantitative easing, which is kind of artificial Fed intervention to push rates lower. So I would not expect that to happen. I think he's probably going to cut sooner, or hike sooner than later, though, which I feel like would probably be appropriate. At the same time that you have inflation going up, the economy is not slowing down. Unemployment's low, and job growth is good. Stock market's booming, and we have this whole kind of AI revolution happening. And I read an article today. I think it was actually in this article, but I'm going to ask you guys your opinion. So when you think of AI, do you think that that's going to create white collar jobs or blue collar jobs? And there was an interesting comment in this article. So if you read it, don't give us a spoiler. But what do you think? Do you think that it's going to create white collar jobs or blue collar jobs as kind of AI expands? Has anybody put any thought into that?
I'm going to say blue collar.
All right, so
Yeah.
I'll give you yeah. So it's interesting
Yeah.
because I think it's mostly blue collar, and one of the reasons for that is, AI might replace white collar jobs, right? Like things that are done at a computer might be done by an AI agent. But when I was thinking blue collar jobs, I was thinking like it'd probably be a pretty good time to own a plumbing company, right? Or like a manufacturing business or a landscaping company or something like that. Like AI is not going to replace those jobs. But the blue collar jobs that AI is really creating right now are data centers. And there's a data center that they're building in Utah. And I was reading some articles over the weekend, but like that data center, it's like 40,000 acres, I believe. So 600 acres is a square mile. So, we're talking like maybe 20 square miles or something unbelievably large. That data center is going to use like twice as much power as the state of Utah has been consuming. And like if you've ever driven by one of those solar farms, right? Like blue collar jobs, construction, manufacturing jobs had to be used to like clear the land, build the solar panels, run the electricity through them, install them. And so a couple years ago, like during the President Trump's first term, there was kind of an oil boom in North Dakota. And like North Dakota was like the hottest state in the country because of oil production and drilling and the Keystone Pipeline, the things they were building. Um, I think data centers are going to be the next, 4 or 5, 10 or longer wave. So unemployment, even though some white collar jobs might shift with AI, there's a lot of blue collar jobs that will have to be developed to provide the infrastructure. And so over the past few months, you guys may have heard me say that I think um, white collar jobs would go away, unemployment might be pushed higher because of AI. It seems like unemployment might not be pushed higher, but it might shift, at least temporarily, right, until everything is built out from white collar to blue collar. So anyway, all this said, at the same time that we've got some challenges with interest rates and inflation, um, we're not in an economy that's slow, and certain sectors of businesses are booming. And so if you have a client that their business is booming, is a little bit higher interest rate going to affect their ability to buy a house or sell a house or move up? Probably not. And so I think anytime there's periods of economic uncertainty, ups and downs like we're seeing now, there's people that are significantly impacted, and there's people that are not impacted. And I think their old saying for salespeople, like, you have 2 ears and one mouth, use them appropriately. Like we have to be listening to our clients right now to get an idea of who's qualified, who's serious in the current economy, who's positioned where not only are they able but willing to take advantage of opportunities that might be in today's market. And someone that's in an employment sector that's growing because of AI probably doesn't care if rates are 6.5 or 6.8, but some people care a lot. And I think we have to ask good questions to figure out where do our customers fall within that. Um, the last thing I'll leave you guys with today, you're starting to see a wider and wider gap between longer term fixed rates and shorter term fixed rates or adjustables. So if we're trying to help people with payment sensitivity with higher interest rates, we've used the term 10-year ARM on calls in the past. I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of. And I'd encourage all of you guys to go through this exercise because this will help you better explain are adjustables appropriate when you're talking to customers. Okay, so um, I'm going to give you guys my examples. Okay, so I bought my first house in 2003. I did a 5-year ARM. Okay, and I did that because rates were lower. I had that 5-year ARM for 3 years. Okay, so did I make the right call doing a 5-year ARM or a 30-year fixed? What do you guys think? Like, was an ARM better than a fixed at that point in time?
Arm was better.
No doubt,
Arm,
right?
arm.
All right. I did another, and I'm not advocating for 5-year ARMs here. 10 and 7, okay, and really 10, like I think is probably the most appropriate for most people. Did a cash out refi in 2005, kind of how I started my first little mortgage venture. Um, that was the longest mortgage I've personally ever had. I had it in 2005. It was 5.5%. In 2010, the 5-year period was up and it adjusted. Okay. What do you guys think the rate did in 2010? Do you think it went up or do you think it went down? Okay, Wilton, you're right, right? It went down from 2010 to 2020. It went down and it was around 3% more or less for the next 10 years until that house was sold. So the longest mortgage I've ever personally had was 15 years, and it was an adjustable that I had adjusting for 10 years. And I'll go through the rest of these quickly. So bought a beach condo in 2014, did a 30-year fix, sold it 2 years later. Was a 30-year fix the right program, or should I have maybe done a 10-year ARM? I had
And
it
your
for two
arm.
years, right? And certain times, like it's the exact same interest rate. So in 2014, when I bought that property, 30-year fixed, 10-year ARM, same rate. If it's the same rate, why would you would always do a 30-year fixed? Um, but then if I look at other properties, like you know, um, built a house, 10-year ARM, lived there for 6 years, sold it, right? And so if you all go through your personal stories of like how long you've had mortgages, rarely have people had mortgages for more than 10 years. Yes, people live in their house more than 10 years, but oftentimes between today and 10 years from now, they're probably going to refinance, especially in today's market where rates are a little bit elevated. And so I think it's a good to have that story that all of us can tell personally with personal experience because lenders should be talking to buyers about 10-year ARMs as an alternative to 30-year fixed, both as a smart financial move. But if rates are elevated, that's a way to keep your rate and payment where it might have been back in February and not see them elevated. Like if 30-year fixed rates are going to 7%, what can we do to get someone into a safe program that's going to be around 6.5%? And ARMs are like, they don't really work a whole lot for investment properties. They're not really great for VA and FHA. So it's really your conventional buyer. But we have a lot of people doing 10-year ARMs right now, both because it makes sense, it's appropriate, it's safe, and it's a cheaper interest rate, a quarter to 0.5% than a 30-year fixed. And so that's a topic of conversation I think we should all start having. I feel like when we educate someone about how those programs work, you see the light bulb go off. They're like, "Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think I should do that." Um, and so that's probably a good topic of discussion for all of us as rates are elevated. The gap between a 10-year ARM and a 30-year fix will widen, and it's a way to keep the payment closer to where it would have been, before rates shot up here in the last 30, 45 days. So definitely something for all of us to be educated on. Um, Okay, guys, lot to unpack from today. Again, if you're on a computer and you can grab those links, definitely, especially the Fed Chair Warsh's article, really good to kind of get a feel for who he is, what his opinions are. If you guys are driving, message whoever you work with on our team. We will get those in your hands, and we will see you guys not next Monday, but next Tuesday. Next Monday is Memorial Day, so we will be on Tuesday. Too much happening in the economy right now. We won't skip a week, but we'll shift this call next week from Monday to Tuesday. So we will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a great week, everybody, and we will talk to you next week.